Pastor, I wanted to ask you a question as a member of the left, particularly someone who's very strong in the pro-Palestinian world. Some, particularly on the left, are decrying the fall of the Assad regime and saying that it's the fall of the last anti-Zionist regime in the area, and that basically we're saying that Assad, even though he may have been an abuser of his power, he was opposed to American imperialism in the area. Based on your understanding, why is there so much of a conflict on the left in terms of analyzing what exactly is the position leftists should have towards Assad, the Assad regime, the removal or supporting of the Assad regime, or supporting the removal of the Assad regime? Why is this such a position, such an area of consternation from your analysis?
Right. So, thank you. First of all, let me clarify that I wouldn't identify as somebody who has been traditionally very strong as a pro-Palestinian activist. That's not what I have been doing with myself and my work for most of my life. It is the what I perceive as the extreme circumstances of this, right? It's not a new situation, absolutely, but it was one of the many, many issues in like the problematic Cold War legacy in the Middle East that I have engaged with. It wasn't Palestine in a vacuum. The reason why I became so involved in all of it as of recently, and I'm sorry, I want to clarify this because I think it's important, is because I'm now an American citizen, and as an American citizen, I felt that the escalation of atrocity in the past year, on the end of Israel, which is like spiraling completely out of control on all fronts, and the shameful, criminal, really enabling of that genocide on the end of the United States of America is a turning point, right? So the way I perceive it, Palestine is the tip of the iceberg right now, that reveals a whole network of corruption, autocracy, the whole system of government, matrix of government rather, from Egypt to Turkey to Syria to Lebanon and Israel, with Saudi Arabia and Iran playing the regional, rivals role and all that. It's just has been a system that was created during the Cold War. It was more messy, I would argue, than the previous analysis on the end of our friends here suggests, and we can revisit that point later on. So there was a whole system of corruption, violence, and autocracy that was put in place during the Cold War. I wouldn't describe it as a chessboard game because it was always more messy. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emergence of far-right Russia as a new type of player, and the US acting for a while as the only global superpower in charge of things, and very quickly proven itself to be not in charge of anything, quite frankly, but shameless profiteering and carnage. Right now we have reached a turning point for the whole region, and what's happening in Gaza, the unfolding genocide, is just the most gruesome, tangible aspect of this whole system that is, in my view, collapsing in the context of unprecedented violence, right? So I wanted to clarify that I would contextualize Gaza and Palestine in general by reference to that broader framework. Now, as to the left, clearly the argument that the Assad regime was somehow a good player or the lesser evil in that context is ridiculous. And I think this is one of the points Jean and I feel very strongly about. do I have to elaborate as to why celebrating a totalitarian, delusional dictator? Because this is one of the main particularities of Bashar al-Assad that make him unique. He was not somebody who was meant for power. He wasn't even one of these usual, dictatorial, militant figures that came to power by playing the game and all that. He found himself in power by accident after his brother died, right, who was prepared for that role. And this is perhaps why Syria became such an anomaly in the context of the Arab Spring. With him living in his own world, he wasn't able to perhaps appreciate what was going on in his own country. That would be my assessment of it. And with Russia and many other actors taking advantage of the situation, clearly, to serve their own agenda. So to celebrate all this as somehow the lesser evil is, number one, a historical. I said it's ridiculous, and I would stand by that position. It is ridiculous, morally, ethically, and from the perspective of any frame of analysis. And it's quite a historical because whether we hate American imperialism or not, and whether we are in a position to criticize, as we should, I would argue, the harm and really instability that the United States of America have introduced into this whole region. um, Russia participated in the Cold War dynamic of terror, the Soviet Union, and in producing that dynamic, right? And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it became an even more erratic and dangerous actor. Erratic is not the right word. So we are referring to a context, a matrix, a system, right, of external interventions. And the totalitarian, autocratic, dictatorial regimes, terrorist groups, all actors that played that game, participated in this game, were enabled by that game. So on the one side, we have this whole matrix, the superpowers fighting against one another, or participating in the superficial Cold War dynamic, producing so much violence and chaos. And then the local actors that played the game and tried to navigate these waters and used it to their own advantage when they could, to promote their own dictatorial and autocratic tendencies. And that's one side of the story. And the other side of the story, as I said, is ordinary people who are all devastated by this situation and have been devastated by this situation for decades now. And quite frankly, I think that this is an artificial external analysis, which is offensive. I mean, the fact that so many on the end of the so-called left, I would say, fail, number one, to appreciate that people on the ground have agency. And first and foremost, we should listen to what they have to say about the situation on the ground. Does anybody among local actors, again, I'm referring to ordinary people in the Arab world, broadly defined, has anything positive to say about Bashar al-Assad and his regime of horror, especially in the past decade or so? It would be very, very difficult to find any group, including but not limited to Palestinians themselves, who, despite getting slaughtered as we speak, this is something that continues in Gaza and the West Bank, they celebrated the collapse of Bashar al-Assad because they do understand what torture and totalitarianism and sacrificing civilian lives means better than anybody else. So these external black and white analysis, oh, if Americans are the bad guys because they're so strong and terrible, I mean, not that we're not that, but that does not imply that, the Americans are the bad guys, the Russians thereby by implications are nothing but the good guys, and whomever is used or tries to use the Russians is also a positive force. It's an ahistorical, ridiculous, and I would say quite offensive framework of analysis. Offensive to whom? To the Syrian people, first and foremost, that celebrated the collapse of the Assad regime almost universally. Yes, there is anxiety about the future. We do not really know what's going to come out of it, but Assad was a really, really bad actor in lack of a different characterization that captures better the situation. And he was a very telling manifestation of this broader system, game, matrix of violence that relies on denying these regions any chance to actual representation, if not from below, at least from the middle, right? To elevate regional agency to something more than just a reference in an alleged game of chess. I don't know if I have answered your question, but to make it a little more clear, if anybody asked me what should be the position of the left in all this, clearly it should be to try and recognize any type of regional agency that can emerge and coexist in this region, and all kinds of external interventions are extremely problematic, and the regimes that benefit from external interventions are extremely problematic as well. It really is as simple as that.